The cliff gave way beneath her with a groan, a low, guttural sound like the death rattle of a collapsing machine. Zirin didn't scream at first. There wasn't time. One heartbeat, she was crawling through the smoldering remains of the Varexan Starblade. Her once proud warship, now a crumpled carcass bleeding fire into the sky. Flames licked the corridors behind her. Bulkheads buckled with shrieking metal. Red lights bathed everything in warnings too late to matter. The next heartbeat, nothing but open air. Gravity seized her, yanked her from the crumbling edge like a jealous god. Wind howled past her ears. Her limbs flailed, weightless and useless. Smoke clung to her lungs. The sky spun above, orange clouds swirling like battle scars, fragments of the wrecked warship tumbling like dying stars. Below, the river churned like liquid thunder, dark and wide and hungry. Instinct took over. She clawed at the cliff face, desperate for anything to stop the fall. Her fingers scraped against jagged stone and found a splintered root jutting out from the rock. It caught. It held, but barely. Her body jerked violently to a halt, and pain exploded in her shoulder. Her visor cracked on impact, a spiderweb of fractures blooming across her field of vision. Blood from a cut on her forehead slipped into one eye, turning the world red. She dangled there, gasping, the roar of the river below mocking her struggle. And no one was coming. No squad mates. No beacon. No rescue. Her team was gone. She'd seen them consumed in the blast. Faces she had trained with, served with, vanished in one blinding inferno. Sabotage, maybe, or perhaps their enemies had found them first. She didn't know. She only knew she was alone. Again, her grip faltered. The root groaned under her weight. Her fingers were slick with rain and blood. Muscles screamed in protest. Not like this, she thought. Not at the edge of some forgotten rock. Not alone, not. A new sound cut through the storm. Footsteps. Not heavy boots like a Varexan soldier. Not the metallic tread of enemy drones. Lighter. Faster. Clumsy. Someone was coming. The root began to tear from the cliffside. Zirin clenched her teeth, bracing herself to fall, when hands gripped her wrists with sudden force. Warm. Solid. Human. She gasped, nearly screamed, but the stranger was already pulling. Her body lurched upward, every nerve screaming in pain as he hauled her toward the ledge. Debris rained down from above, shards of metal, broken branches, bits of her own ship. One struck the ground just beside the human's foot, sending up a splash of mud and sparks. Still, he didn't let go. "Come on," he shouted, his voice rough, urgent, alien. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Hold on. With a final grunt of effort, he dragged her onto the muddy ledge, and they collapsed side by side, soaked, gasping, half dead. For a breathless moment, they didn't move. Rain beat down around them, thick and icy, slicing the world into smears of gray. Thunder cracked above, shaking the ground beneath them. Her shoulder throbbed. Her head swam. Then, realization struck her like a whip. He had touched her. Zirin jolted upright, adrenaline spiking. She shoved away from him and scrambled to her feet, slipping once in the mud. The man raised his head, confused, lips parted to speak, just in time to find himself staring down the barrel of her sidearm. Her voice came out hoarse but sharp. "Don't move." He didn't understand the words, of course, but the gun was universal. He froze. Zirin kept the weapon steady, even as her fingers trembled. How? How had a human gotten here? This planet was restricted. Even the Varexan Empire had marked it off limits after the war. No one was supposed to be here. No one but ghosts and wreckage. And yet here he was. The human looked young, late 20s maybe, dirty blonde hair plastered to his forehead, brown eyes intense but cautious. His clothes were torn, patched in places with what looked like makeshift repairs. No armor, no weapons, no translator node. Just a small pack slung over his shoulder and an expression that said what the hell is going on. He slowly raised his hands in surrender. "I'm not your enemy," he said gently. "I just saw you falling. I couldn't just watch you die." His words were nonsense to her ears, but his tone was calm, non-threatening. Still, Her kind didn't tolerate unauthorized contact, especially from species still considered pre-ascendant. Zirin didn't lower the gun. The human glanced at the weapon, then at her face. He made a gesture, first pointing to himself, then spreading his hands as if to say, "I mean no harm." Then he pointed to her and mimed someone falling, arms waving dramatically, then pointed to his hands and mimed catching her. He even gave a faint, sheepish shrug. She blinked, momentarily stunned by the crude but honest attempt at communication. Then something in the distance screamed. Both of them turned. It wasn't wind. It wasn't metal. It was alive. A deep, ululating cry echoed through the valley, bouncing off the cliffs and dancing with the storm. Zirin's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. It belonged to the Kralix, a native predator that hunted by vibration and heat. A pack of them could strip a body to bone in under 2 minutes. Her weapon wouldn't last long against a pack, and she doubted his fists would do much more than annoy them. She looked at him, then back toward the sound. There was no time for debate. "Come," she ordered, gesturing down the slope. He hesitated. She pointed again, more urgently this time, then mimed running. He got the message. They ran. The terrain was a nightmare of broken roots, slick moss, and jagged stone. The gravity pulled heavier here than on most charted systems. Each step was a fight. Zirin led the way, skirting fallen trees and crumbling ledges, while the human, Stu, she would later learn, kept pace behind her, surprisingly agile despite his lack of gear. They didn't speak. They couldn't afford to. The creature howled again, closer now. Finally, she spotted it, a half-collapsed structure jutting out of the earth like a broken tooth. Once a research bunker, probably now just bones and metal. But it was shelter. "In here," she barked, shoving debris aside. He ducked inside after her, and she sealed the entry with a panel override. The door hissed shut just as the sound of claws skittered across the rocks outside. Silence fell. Both of them leaned against opposite walls of the cramped space, gasping for breath. Zirin's legs shook. Her hands, too. She looked at him, this mud-covered, wide-eyed primitive who had no idea what he'd just saved. And for the first time since the crash, she didn't feel entirely alone. Not safe. Not yet. But not alone. He looked back at her with open curiosity. No fear. No judgment. Just a quiet question in his eyes. Zirin didn't lower her weapon, but she didn't point it at him either. The tension would hold. For now, they had survived the fall, but the real test hadn't even begun. The silence inside the bunker stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. Rain lashed against the dented metal walls. The air inside smelled of scorched metal and mold, soaked into every surface after years of abandonment. Faint emergency lights flickered from the far corner, casting red glows that pulsed like a failing heartbeat. Zirin didn't speak. Her breathing had steadied, but the adrenaline still surged beneath her skin. She kept her back pressed to the cold wall, her sidearm still in hand, but now lowered to her thigh. The human, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere, dragging her back from death, watched her with a mix of caution and curiosity. He didn't try to speak again. Not yet. There was too much space between them, not just physically, but culturally, biologically, existentially. He didn't belong here, and neither did she. Zirin had once believed herself unshakable. As a second-class fleet commander in the Varexan Empire's Outer Defense Division, she'd commanded operations across 4 sectors, negotiated ceasefires with unstable border species, and executed missions with mathematical precision. She was disciplined, logical, respected. And now, she was stranded. Sabotage, she suspected. The explosion hadn't followed protocol. Its timing was too clean, its destruction too surgical. The Starblade hadn't simply failed. Someone had wanted them dead. All of them, except her. And now, inexplicably, she owed her life to a human. The man crouched near a fallen crate, carefully unpacking the contents of his travel bag. He pulled out a small tin of medical gel, the kind used in long-term survival kits, and inspected a cut on his forearm. His hands moved slowly, not out of hesitation but habit, practiced utilitarian. Whoever he was, he'd done this before. Zirin studied him through narrowed eyes. He wasn't military. No insignias. No visible implants. But he wasn't helpless either. His body language suggested someone used to moving alone, to surviving without command or camaraderie. She didn't trust him, but she couldn't afford to be alone again either. He looked up suddenly, catching her watching him. "You're injured," he said softly, tapping his own temple, then motioning toward her head. She blinked at the gesture, then realized blood, still leaking from the gash above her brow. She didn't reply, just reached for her belt pouch and pulled out a sterile patch. She pressed it to the wound, hissing slightly at the sting. He smiled faintly, not mockingly, just quietly impressed. "Guess we're both a little broken, huh?" His words meant nothing to her, but the tone was unmistakable, gentle, almost companionable. It unsettled her more than she expected. A sudden noise outside made both of them freeze. A long, guttural growl rolled past the door like thunder at ground level. Then claws, scraping, testing the seams of the entryway. Zirin's body went rigid. She mouthed a silent curse in her native tongue. The Kraliks hadn't moved on. The human glanced toward the door, then back at her. He stood silently, hand drifting to his belt. From a side pocket, he pulled a compact flare device and held it up, questioning. Zirin frowned, then understood. She nodded. He gave her a tight nod in return, then pointed to the far wall. There was a second exit, half buried under rubble, probably missed by the creature's senses. She moved first, creeping toward the pile of collapsed sheet metal. He followed closely, keeping low. The bunker groaned under the pressure of the storm outside. Another snarl echoed, closer this time. The creature was sniffing, hunting. Zirin set her weapon on the floor and began moving debris with her hands. Sharp edges tore at her gloves. Dust filled the air. Behind her, the human moved a jagged beam aside with a low grunt. The path slowly widened, but not fast enough. The growl became a roar, and then came the unmistakable sound of impact. Something huge slamming against the main door. The human wasted no time. He lit the flare and hurled it toward the far end of the room. It ignited with a hiss and a burst of light, bouncing off the wall and landing behind a broken console. The Kraliks responded instantly. A shriek, then a lurch. Zirin threw herself through the half-cleared exit, just as the inner door exploded inward in a burst of twisted metal and sound. The human dove after her. They tumbled down a steep embankment, half sliding, half falling into a trench below. When the dust cleared, they lay in silence. Alive, breathing, barely. Zirin rolled on her side, coughing. Mud clung to her armor. Her injured shoulder screamed in protest. The human groaned nearby. That went better than expected. She didn't understand, but she recognized the tone of strained sarcasm. And for the first time, the corners of her mouth twitched, half a smirk, half a wince. He sat up slowly, squinting through the rain. The Kraliks hadn't followed. Not yet, but the sound of its fury still echoed above. Zirin knew this world too well. There would be more, and worse. They needed shelter, real shelter. She stood, wavering slightly, then pointed toward the distant ridge. Beyond it, if she remembered the map correctly, lay the ruins of an old supply station. Abandoned, but fortified. The human followed her finger, then gave a tired nod. He pushed himself to his feet, wiped blood from his cheek, and fell in a step beside her. They didn't speak. They just walked. The path ahead was dark, uncertain, and filled with threats neither of them fully understood. But they walked it anyway, together. And somewhere between one breath and the next, without a word exchanged, they stopped being strangers. They became survivors. Night had finally settled over the alien wasteland, cloaking the jagged terrain in deep violet shadows. A low wind swept across the hills, whispering through broken pylons and rusted scaffolding, its mournful sound echoing like the memory of a civilization long gone. The storm had passed, but the chill remained, sharp, biting, and constant. Inside the ruined supply station, a fragile kind of silence took hold. Not the tense, uncertain quiet of earlier, but something slower, steadier, warmer. The old outpost was falling apart, its walls half collapsed and scorched by age. Yet it was enough. Enough to keep the rain out. Enough to protect them, at least for the night. A small heat emitter, ancient but surprisingly functional, glowed in the center of the room, bathing the space in a dim orange light. The warmth it provided was minimal, but it kept their fingers from going numb. Zirin sat cross-legged near the heat source, shoulders relaxed, her sidearm within reach, but no longer in her hand. Her long black hair, still damp, clung to her shoulders and cheekbones. The faint glow of the emitter gave her violet skin an ethereal sheen, highlighting the sharp angles of her jaw and the small burn mark near her temple, a fresh wound earned during the crash. Across from her, Stu leaned against the wall, one knee pulled up, hands loosely clasped in front of him. He was watching her, not with suspicion or fear anymore, but curiosity, a kind of quiet awe. They had shared silence for hours now, watching, waiting, occasionally exchanging glances, but never quite crossing the invisible line between them. Finally, Stu broke the quiet. "My name's Stu," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Short for Stuart, but no one's called me that in years." Zirin looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't understand all the words, but the tone was unmistakable. "Introduction." He pointed to himself again, slower this time. "Stu." Then he gestured to her with a questioning look. She hesitated. Trust didn't come easily. Not anymore. But something about the way he'd said his name, offering it like a small truce, not a demand, softened her. "Zirin," she said carefully. His lips moved, repeating it quietly. "Zirin." She nodded. And with that simple exchange, something shifted between them. Not quite trust, but a step toward it. Stu exhaled, a small laugh escaping. "Well, Zirin, you're officially the first alien I've met who hasn't tried to kill me on sight. So that's something." She tilted her head at the tone, the slight smirk on his lips. She couldn't understand the joke, but she recognized the cadence. Humor, relief, maybe. It was a universal language in its own way. No kill," she said slowly, pointing to herself, then shaking her head. "No kill you." He raised both eyebrows. "Thanks. I appreciate that." Zirin watched him for a long moment, then shifted, touching her chest. "Varexin," she said. "Command. Outer Fleet." "Varexin," he echoed. "That's your people?" She nodded. "Empire. I serve." Stu leaned back slightly. "So, you're military." A faint nod. "Me too. Sort of. Well, used to be," he added, rubbing the back of his neck. She frowned, the word not registering. He pointed himself. "Scout. Explorer. Earth system. Long-range recon." "Earth," she repeated slowly. "Yeah, you've heard of it." Zirin gave a slow shrug. "Primitive world. Restricted." Stu laughed, short and dry. "Figures." He grew quiet after that. The flickering light cast long shadows across his face, catching the weariness in his eyes. He seemed older in that moment, not in age, but in the weight he carried. Zirin watched him closely, then spoke. "Why here?" she asked. "Why this world?" Stu was quiet for a few seconds. Then he looked up at her, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "I wasn't supposed to be here. My ship was mapping the fringe systems, and then we caught a distress signal. Or what we thought was a distress signal. We tracked it, got too close to this system." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Then everything went to hell. Power surge. Instruments fried. I ejected before the ship imploded." Zirin's brow furrowed. "Alone?" "Yeah," he said softly. Since then, something in her expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, of empathy. "You too?" he asked. She hesitated. "My ship," she began, then stopped. The words were hard to form, harder still to say aloud. "Sabotage. Explosion. All dead." Stu's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was no barrier, no misunderstanding, no cultural divide, just shared loss. He didn't offer pity, didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, it was simple. "I'm sorry." Zirin nodded once. That was enough. They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't need to be filled, the kind that understood its own weight. Eventually, Stu looked around at the dilapidated walls, then back at her. "Do you think anyone's coming for you?" She looked down. No. He nodded, unsurprised. Me neither. They sat quietly, the truth settling between them. Neither of them was getting out of here alone. Zirin shifted, her gaze returning to the broken doorway. This world. Not safe. Yeah, Stu agreed. I noticed. Creatures. Kroliks. Territory hunting. Heat signature. Great, he muttered. So we're on the menu. Zirin didn't smile. Not exactly. But her voice softened. Together, safer. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The sharp lines of her face. The way her eyes searched his, as if testing his answer before he gave it. I'm with you, he said. Not because he had to, because he meant it. Zirin nodded slowly. We survive. Together. And just like that, the gap between them shrank. Not completely, but enough. They were no longer just two strangers stranded on a hostile world. They were allies. And in a place like this, that was the rarest kind of gift. Morning on this forsaken world wasn't marked by sunlight, but by the fading of storm clouds into a sluggish, murky dawn. The sky turned a muted violet gray, heavy with moisture and always threatening more rain. Cold mist hung over the ground, winding through shattered beams and fallen pylons like a ghost too stubborn to leave. Inside the crumbling supply station, warmth had been fleeting. The heat emitter had flickered out hours ago. They'd managed a few hours of rest. Uneasy, fragmented, but exhaustion had won out over caution. Zirin was awake before Stu. She sat near the ruined wall where a gap opened out onto the misty ridge. Her eyes scanned the horizon, every movement of the mist noted, every distant sound cataloged. She had learned to wake with her instincts fully alert. In the Varexan military, hesitation often meant death. Still, her thoughts weren't solely on threats this morning. Her gaze occasionally drifted back to him. Stu lay on his side, one arm curled beneath his head. His breathing was steady calm. There was a slight furrow between his brows, as if even in sleep, he wasn't entirely at peace. His face was still smudged with dirt from the previous night's escape. A faint scar ran beneath his jaw, barely visible under the stubble. Zirin didn't understand him. Not fully. But his presence no longer felt alien. He had become familiar in a way she hadn't expected. Not comfortable exactly, but dependable. Like the blade of a well-worn weapon. Scarred but reliable. A piece of metal clattered outside, sharp and sudden. Stu stirred awake instantly, blinking groggily before sitting up. Something out there? He asked, voice gravelly from sleep. Zirin held up a hand. Wind, she said simply. He relaxed a little, rubbing at his eyes. Right, morning wind. Nothing ominous about that. He reached for a ration bar from his pack and tossed one her way. She caught it easily, tearing the seal with practiced efficiency. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the mist curling around the broken walls like a living thing. The silence between them felt different today, less tense, more reflective. Then Stu spoke quietly. You ever think about what you'd be doing right now if things hadn't gone to hell? Zirin didn't answer immediately. She chewed slowly, her jaw working the tough bar, then swallowed and set the wrapper aside. I would be aboard the Varexan Starblade, she said, her voice distant. Orbit patrol. Routine check of fringe colonies. Nothing important. Just orders. Stu tilted his head. You say that like you didn't believe in it. I did. I do. Her gaze hardened slightly. But after a while, duty becomes repetition. You don't question it until the system fails. Until someone betrays you. Stu leaned back on his elbows. You think someone set you up? Yes, she said. Sabotage. The explosion was too precise. Systems failed in sequence. It was intentional. He nodded slowly. That's rough. Zirin's eyes met his. And you? Why scout alone? Why risk coming to restricted space? His smile didn't reach his eyes. I had nothing left to lose. She said nothing, waiting. My brother and I. We were on the same survey crew, he explained. 2 years ago, his shuttle disappeared on the edge of this system. No signal. No wreckage. Just gone. Command called it a miscalculation. I didn't buy it. He drew in a breath. I used what I had left to trace his last jump. My ship was already falling apart by the time I got here. And when I landed, He gestured at the ruined world around them. Well, you've seen the welcome party. Zirin looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You came for someone, not for yourself. He met her gaze. Same as you. Their eyes locked. The quiet between them deepened. But then, as if the world resented the peace they'd found, tension crept in. It started with a misstep, innocent enough. Stu reached across her line of sight to pick up his bag. Zirin tensed, flinching slightly. She didn't mean to. It was instinctive. A reflex hammered into her since childhood. Her people weren't raised to trust proximity. Stu noticed. He froze, arm halfway extended. I wasn't trying to, he began. I know, she said sharply, then softer. I know. An awkward silence settled. Stu lowered his hand slowly. I forget sometimes. That touch means something different for you. Zirin exhaled. It's not personal. My people, we're conditioned to guard our boundaries. Physical space is sacred. It's not about offense. It's about survival. Stu nodded. Makes sense. She tilted her head, searching his expression. But you didn't flinch when I pointed a weapon at you. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Maybe I've been threatened enough that it doesn't rattle me like it used to. They sat in silence again, not quite sure how to recover the moment. Then, as if to change the subject, Zirin reached into her satchel and pulled out a thin piece of metal, a navigation chip from her ship's databanks, scorched but intact. She placed it on the floor between them. This held all the system's logs, she said. Star routes, patrol paths, trade points. Now, she tapped the blackened edge. Now it's just a reminder of what was lost. Stu looked at it, then at her. I'm not saying I know how to fix it, he said. But if we get out of this alive, maybe we can find someone who can. She didn't answer, but she didn't take the chip back, either. Outside, the wind shifted. A shriek pierced the air, sharp, distant, but unmistakable. Krolix. Zirin stood immediately. We need to move. They're hunting. Stu grabbed his gear. Same direction as before. She nodded. There's an abandoned satellite uplink station 3 kilometers northeast. If we reach it before dusk, we can use the signal booster. Maybe trigger an old distress code, assuming it still works. She shot him a glance. Assume nothing. Prepare for everything. As they stepped out into the fog, the tension of earlier still lingered between them. But so did something else. A thread of connection, thin, fragile, but real. They walked side by side, no longer just out of necessity. There was something growing between them now. Not yet trust, not yet understanding, but possibility. The uplink station loomed like a haunted memory. Its broken dish angled crookedly toward a sky, shrouded in ash and fading light. Bent support beams jutted from its walls like exposed ribs. The high-altitude wind screamed against its structure, whispering remnants of battles long past. Inside, dust and silence clung to the walls like mold. Console panels blinked faintly, flickering back to life after years of slumber. Power was intermittent, but it was there, an ember waiting to spark. Zirin moved through the station with practiced steps, her hands trailing across ancient Virexan alloy. She knew this place, not personally, but in the way a soldier knows the taste of war. It bore the hallmarks of old conflicts, desperate last stands, silent fallbacks, forgotten dead. Stu followed a few paces behind, cradling a salvaged battery pack. You sure this place won't collapse on us? Zirin spared him a glance. It held during the Jorix raids. It will hold now. He snorted. Comforting. They made camp in the station's command room. One wall had collapsed, revealing a jagged view of the valley below. Thick gray fog rolled between shattered trees like slow-moving waves. In the distance, a Krolix's howl echoed up the canyon. Neither of them reacted. Too tired. Too used to it. Stu dropped his pack beside the console. You think we'll get a signal out? If the comm relay's dish is intact, yes, Zirin said. I just need time to sync it to an active Virexan frequency. He hesitated. And if they answer? Zirin didn't respond immediately. She stared at the terminal as it booted, humming softly with life. Its screen flickered once, then stabilized. She keyed in a series of encrypted commands, her fingers moving almost too fast to follow. The silence between them thickened. I think you're not telling me everything, Stu said quietly. Her hands paused. About what? About your ship, he said. About what really happened. Zirin's jaw tightened. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. I told you. It was sabotage, right? But not by who or why. She exhaled slowly, as if weighing a choice. Then she stepped back from the terminal, crossing her arms, her eyes scanning the ruins outside. My ship was the Varexan Starblade, a long-range reconnaissance cruiser. We weren't just patrolling. We were transporting a political prisoner, someone from within the High Conclave, someone they didn't want tried in public. Stu's brow furrowed. So, an internal threat? A senator. Laren Soul. Her voice flattened at the name. She uncovered evidence of a secret weapons development program. Something so dangerous, it violated every interstellar treaty we ever signed. She tried to bring it to light. They silenced her. I was assigned to escort her to a black site detainment center. He moved closer. And you didn't know what she'd found? I wasn't supposed to, Zirin said. But I listened. I read her files. And I started to believe her. Stu watched her closely. I delayed our route, she continued. Tried to stall for time. I contacted an old friend in the outer territories, someone I thought could help leak the data. Her voice dropped lower. He betrayed me. Sold our location to the Empire's internal order. They sent an assassin aboard. Someone I trusted. She went silent. Stu said nothing. The only sound was the distant howl of wind scraping against the station. I survived because I was on the lower deck, rerouting auxiliary power, Zirin said at last. The explosion gutted the main bridge. Laren died instantly. My crew. I didn't even have time to scream. She looked up at him. That's why I'm here. Not just because I crashed. Because I was meant to crash. They wanted me dead. To bury the evidence. To erase the trail. Stu absorbed it in silence. Why didn't you tell me? He asked eventually. She shrugged one shoulder. Would you have believed me? That my own command turned on me? That I was once part of a system that hunts people like you for study? Maybe, he said. But hearing it now, I get why you're afraid to trust. Zirin glanced back at the console. Then the screen flashed. A signal. A live one. Her body went still. On the screen, Z-Cray command node active. Directive Prime, 88 pending. A moment later, a scrambled voice buzzed to life through the static. Outrider Zirin. Signal confirmed. Do not engage target. Hold position. Retrieval inbound. Asset must be intact. Stu stepped forward, eyes locked on the screen. What's that mean? Zirin didn't answer. Stu's voice dropped. Zirin, it's a containment protocol, she said finally, for unregistered alien contact. Anyone like you, unknown to Varexan law, is considered a Class 4 specimen. Non-citizen, non-aligned. They'll study you, strip your mind for data, then dispose of you. Stu's fists clenched. So they know I'm here. Yes. And they're coming. Yes. He stared at her. And what were you going to do? Hand me over to clear your name? Her eyes snapped to his, furious. No. I didn't even mean to activate the beacon. It was dormant. As soon as I powered the relay, it broadcasted. I didn't know. He stepped back from her. But they know now. And if they land here, I'm dead. Zirin looked stricken. I can hide you. I can lie. I can say you escaped. You think they'll believe that? Stu demanded. They tracked your biometrics. You don't think they'll scan for mine? I'll disable the scan tower. They'll still question you. I'll take the blame. He shook his head. You don't get it, Zirin. You're still part of them, whether you like it or not. She flinched as if struck. Then, with sudden rage, she turned and smashed the console with the butt of her weapon. Sparks exploded. The screen died instantly. I'm not one of them, she snarled. Not anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Stu stared at the smoking console. Zirin stood shaking, breathing hard, her weapon still clenched. You really believe that? He asked. She nodded once, slowly. Yes. He looked at her. Not just her words, but her eyes. Her pain. Her choice. Then he turned away. I need air, he muttered, and he walked out into the cold. She didn't follow. The sky over the uplink station was bleeding orange, stained by the setting sun as it dipped beneath the jagged skyline. The clouds glowed like coals in a dying fire, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. Everything felt too quiet, unnaturally still, like the breath the world takes before a scream. Zirin stood inside the command chamber, her reflection faint in the shattered console screens. Smoke still curled from the mangled device she destroyed hours earlier. Around her, the once dormant systems flickered to life, trying to recover from her outburst. Warning lights blinked softly, as if uncertain whether they still had something to warn against. She was alone, or had been. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not heavy, like Stu's, but sharper, measured, coordinated. Her heart stilled. She recognized that cadence. Varexin. She stepped away from the console and into the hallway, her hand drifting to the sidearm on her hip. The air felt colder, not from temperature but memory. It reminded her of training grounds, of silent corridors lined with steel, of orders spoken in unflinching tones. Then she saw them, 3 Varexin operatives in black field armor, helmets matte and featureless, visors humming faintly. The one in the center raised a hand. Outrider Zirin, a filtered voice greeted. Stand down. Command acknowledges your survival. Zirin didn't lower her weapon. You shouldn't be here. The lead officer took a slow step forward. You activated a Class 4 distress beacon in a restricted zone. Protocol demanded our response. Where's the human? She said nothing. Directive Prime, 88 is in effect. Compliance ensures your exoneration. I destroyed the relay, she said evenly. You were a soldier, Zirin, not a fool. The signal went out. A pause. Then, we tracked his biosignature near this station. Zirin didn't blink. He's not here. A second operative raised a scanning device. It pulsed with blue light, humming softly as it passed across the corridor. He was here recently. Heat trace residual. Less than 1 cycle. The lead officer shifted. You're obstructing a retrieval operation. Why? Because he's not a threat, she said. He saved my life. Twice. That's irrelevant. To you, Zirin said. They didn't argue. They reached for their weapons. At that exact moment, a voice rang out from the far end of the hallway. Don't shoot. Stu emerged from the stairwell, hands raised. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked toward Zirin, searching, questioning. I heard the ships. Figured it was now or never. Zirin's heart dropped. What are you doing? She hissed. Ending it, he said. If this is how it goes, better face it head on. The Varexin lead gestured toward the others. Detain him. They moved forward, and Zirin stepped between them. Weapons drew. You will not touch him, she said, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You are interfering with a direct command. He's under my protection. The lead officer's visor tilted. You would betray your species for a primitive? Already did, she said, when I refused to let you rewrite the truth. When I chose to believe in something other than control. Silence. Then everything exploded. The second operative raised a stun rifle. Stu reacted instinctively, lunging for cover behind a console. Zirin fired first. Her bolt struck the rifle out of the attacker's hands with precision. Sparks flew, and chaos broke loose. Blaster fires scorched the walls. Zirin moved like lightning, a blur of violet skin and focused fury. She ducked low, fired once, then again. A blast clipped one soldier's leg, sending him sprawling. Stu grabbed a fallen shock baton and swung hard at the third operative, who dodged but faltered enough for Zirin to slam her boot into their chest. She grabbed Stu's arm. This way, they ran, through crumbling corridors, through doors that hissed half open and hallways choked with debris. Behind them, the operatives regrouped. A siren, an old internal system, screeched to life as emergency lockdown protocols began activating. They're trying to trap us, Zirin shouted. We need the sub-level exit. They descended into darkness, flashlights flickering. Zirin guided them through what had once been maintenance access tunnels, now half-flooded and smelling of rust and decay. They'll block the hatch, Stu said. We won't make it. Zirin skidded to a halt, eyes flicking toward an auxiliary panel. If I reroute power to the blast doors, will that give us time? It'll give us a chance. He nodded. Then let's do it. She pulled a panel off the wall and began rerouting wires. Sparks flew. Her fingers moved with desperate clarity rerouting old power cores, isolating feedback loops. The moment the override clicked, she shouted, "Now!" They sprinted down the final corridor as the base behind them began to collapse. The relay tower, damaged from earlier blasts, groaned as it tilted, then crashed into the station in a plume of smoke and fire. They burst into the open just as the hatch slammed shut behind them. Above them, a Varexan dropship was circling, searchlights carving into the landscape. Zirin pulled Stu behind a fallen comms array. "We can't stay here," she said, breathing hard. "They'll keep coming," he said. She nodded. "Not if we go somewhere they can't follow." "And where's that?" Zirin glanced toward the east horizon, where the mountains split the clouds like jagged teeth. "There's an old mining network under the cliffs. Forgotten. Unmapped." Stu looked at her, eyes raw and searching. "You sure about this?" She met his gaze. "No, but I'm sure of you." They didn't say anything else. They ran, together, side by side, through fire, through fog, through the ruins of a world that no longer wanted them. But they weren't running away. They were running towards something new. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't as lost as they'd once believed. The mountains rose before them like ancient sentinels, their sharp peaks carved into jagged silhouettes against a darkening sky. Stu and Zirin stood at the edge of a wind-carved plateau, breaths heavy, limbs trembling with fatigue, yet hearts beating with a singular rhythm. Behind them, the uplink station smoldered, a dying relic of a world neither of them could return to. The path they'd taken through the collapsed tunnels had been long, treacherous, and suffocating. It had nearly collapsed behind them twice. They'd emerged scratched, bruised, and half-choked by ash and debris, but alive. Together. Now the wind brushed over the cliffs like a whisper. The last of the day's light bled into the sky in copper and wine. Far below, the ravines twisted like rivers of stone, glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss. The Kralets were gone for now. The Varexan dropship hadn't circled back. But both of them knew this peace wasn't permanent. Zirin exhaled slowly. Her shoulders finally lowered, the tension bleeding out of her like smoke. Her violet skin shimmered faintly in the low light, and her long, dark hair fluttered in the mountain wind. Stu watched her for a long time before breaking the silence. "You didn't have to come back for me." She glanced at him, brow lifted. "I did." "No, you didn't. You could have escaped. Gone with them. Started over. No one would have blamed you." Her gaze turned toward the horizon. "No one would have known. But you would have." Zirin nodded. "And that's enough." A long silence passed between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything they didn't need to say. Then Stu spoke again, quieter now. "So what happens next?" Zirin took a step forward, letting the wind brush over her face. "There's a smuggler's path on the other side of these mountains. Old mining tunnels connect to a neutral outpost system, far from Varexan space. If we can get there, we'll be out of range of their scans. No one will be looking for us that far from the core." Stu gave a slow nod. "And after that," she turned to him, and for the first time, there was no armor in her eyes. No command, no calculation, just her. "I don't know," she said. "But whatever it is, it won't be dictated by orders. Or fear." He stepped beside her. "I'm not much of a map guy, but I've got a stubborn streak and decent instincts. That's more than most I've served with." A flicker of a smile passed between them. Tentative. Real. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "If we make it out of this, would you stay? Not just survive with me. Build something. Live." Her expression didn't shift for several seconds. Then, softly, "I've spent most of my life following paths laid out by others. This, whatever it is between us, it's not familiar, but it's real. And that matters more to me now than anything I left behind." He reached out, not forcefully, but open-palmed. And this time he didn't flinch. He took her hand. Warm, steady, alive. And then he kissed her. As the sky deepened into night, they sat together at the edge of the world. Two beings from different stars, bound not by orders or fate, but by a simple choice of trust. To start again. They did not know what the next day would bring. Whether they would make it over the mountains, whether the outpost would still stand, or whether the galaxy would leave them alone. But there was one thing they knew for certain. They were no longer alone. And that was enough. Dawn broke with a reluctant glow, casting streaks of dull amber light across the scarred horizon. The storm had passed, but the aftermath lingered in the dampness that clung to every surface and in the silence too deep to be called peaceful. A fine mist coiled through the ravines, settling low against the rocks and wrapping the world in quiet suspense. The wind had died down to a whisper, but it carried the scent of scorched earth and mineral-rich dust, reminders of the fight they'd just survived. Zirin sat at the base of a broken ridge, her knees drawn up, arms resting on them, chin tilted to the gray sky. Her muscles ached, her shoulder throbbed with dull pain where a fragment of debris had grazed her the night before. Yet, despite the discomfort, she felt strangely calm. Not safe, not entirely, but still here. Behind her, Stu emerged from the shallow alcove they'd taken shelter in. His movements were quiet, deliberate, but she sensed him before he spoke. She always did. He stopped beside her and exhaled, his breath briefly fogging in the morning air. "You didn't sleep?" he said. She didn't answer right away. No, he didn't press. They had reached an understanding, one forged not in spoken agreements, but in choices, in the weight of glances and the quiet between footfalls. Words weren't always necessary anymore. He looked out over the jagged valley ahead, where the broken edges of the terrain gave way to a narrow path slithering between two towering cliffs. Beyond it, the landscape leveled into a basin of wind-carved rock and stunted trees, and if Zirin's map was right, the entrance to the forgotten tunnel network that could lead them to the fringe systems. The last step, or the first. "Do you really think this outpost still exists?" he asked. Zirin's gaze drifted toward the pass. "It was a smuggler route before the war. We used it once to move a damaged cruiser off-grid. It's not on any official maps. If the structure hasn't collapsed, there should still be a hangar and a supply cache. And if it's gone, then we keep moving." His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Zirin stood, brushing dirt from her knees, her gaze never leaving the looming entrance of the pass. "It'll be narrow," she said. "Visibility is limited, but there's a path." "There always is," Stu said quietly. They set off together, the sound of their boots crunching against gravel swallowed quickly by the canyon walls. As they entered the pass, the air changed thicker, colder, tinged with something ancient. The walls rose high on either side, forming a natural corridor so tight that at times they had to turn sideways to slip through. It was quiet, too quiet. Zirin slowed. Her eyes scanned the ridges above. Stu noticed. Something wrong? "This place has seen movement recently." He looked around. "You mean animal tracks?" "No, boot prints." Stu's hand hovered near the pistol at his side. "Virexins." She shook her head. "Too irregular. Scattered. Rushed. Like someone was fleeing." They exchanged a glance, then moved faster, more cautiously. The further they went, the more signs they saw: shattered crates, a strip of torn fabric, even a dried trail of blood on one of the rocks. But no bodies, no bones, nothing to explain where they'd gone. The terrain grew steeper, twisting like a maze. Occasionally, strange rustling sounds echoed through the crevices, never close enough to identify, but always present. Watching, listening. They reached a narrow choke point where the path constricted between two towering slabs of stone. Zirin gestured for Stu to stop and crouched, scanning the ridge. And then it struck. A shadow dropped from above, sleek, fast, and silent. Zirin pivoted just in time, firing a bolt that struck the creature mid-leap. It let out a distorted shriek and crumpled to the ground. It wasn't a Krolix. It was something else. Sleeker. Smarter. Zirin moved to its side and examined the body. It was humanoid, barely. Lithe, four-limbed, with camouflage skin that shimmered like the air over heated stone. Stu stepped beside her, eyes narrowed. "I don't like this." "They were bred as stealth predators," she murmured. "Blackguard experiments. Illegal even in Virexin space." "Then what are they doing here?" Zirin's throat tightened. "Someone's still testing them." Before Stu could respond, More rustling came, multiple sources. They're not alone, Zirin snapped. Run. They didn't hesitate. The terrain blurred past as they sprinted. The predators gave chase, fast and fluid, claws scraping stone, guttural growls reverberating through the pass. Just ahead, the cliffs opened into a jagged ledge overhanging the basin below. A drop of nearly 15 meters. Zirin didn't slow. Jump, she shouted. Stu's eyes widened. You're insane. Trust me. And she jumped. Without thinking, Stu followed. They hit hard, rolling down the slope, limbs flailing, stones tearing at their clothes. When they stopped, battered and gasping, they lay in a bed of shale and moss. Above, the predators snarled but didn't follow. The drop had saved them. Next time, Stu groaned. You warned me before the death dive. Zirin smirked faintly. You're still alive. He looked at her, wild hair, bruised arms, fierce eyes, and laughed breathlessly. Yeah, because you're insane. She stood and offered him a hand. He took it. They turned. At the base of the ravine, half covered in dust and vines, was a metallic structure built into the rock. A hatch, marked with smuggler runes and the faded seal of a long-dead mining guild. Zirin stepped forward and pressed her palm to the sensor. It blinked once, then opened. Warm air spilled out. The hum of dormant systems waking up echoed through the space. They stepped inside together, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the door behind them closed. Not to trap them, but to shelter them. The door sealed behind them with a heavy hiss, and for the first time in days, the outside world was completely cut off. No screaming wind, no screeching predators, no Varexan patrol ships blotting out the sky. Just a low mechanical hum, the dry scent of filtered air, and silence. A deep, artificial calm that settled into their bones. Stu stood still, blinking against the sudden change in light. His eyes adjusted quickly, scanning the interior. What he saw surprised him. He'd expected a ruin, a tomb of rust and broken systems. But this place had endured. The entry corridor was narrow, but its walls were intact. Dim emergency lights blinked along the floor, guiding their steps forward. This place shouldn't be this well-preserved, he said quietly. Zirin nodded beside him, her expression unreadable. Smugglers took care of their investments. The mining guilds built these outposts to survive anything short of orbital bombardment. They moved deeper into the complex. With every step, Stu could feel the tension in his chest easing. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no immediate threat chasing them. No trap waiting spring. Only stone, steel, and the soft hum of buried power cells still pulsing after all these years. They found a central chamber tucked into the heart of the mountain. A wide, circular space surrounded by auxiliary tunnels and storage units, all lit with the same dull orange glow. In the center stood a long-in-use command station, coated in a thin film of dust. Beside it sat a small maintenance droid, its limbs folded inward, long dormant. Zirin approached the console, her fingers brushing over its controls like a ghost returning home. She didn't need instructions. Her hands moved with silent confidence, tapping out a sequence that brought the system fully online. The lights brightened. A low chime echoed through the chamber. The sanctuary had awakened. Stu looked around, the tension in his shoulders slowly releasing. Do you think they'll find us here? If they do, they'll have to dig us out from beneath 20 meters of solid rock, Zirin replied. And I just activated the internal defense field. You're full of surprises. I have to be. I'm still alive. Stu chuckled, but the sound faded quickly. His eyes lingered on her profile, the strength in her posture, the calm in her movements, even now. But beneath it all, he saw something else too. Weariness. A heaviness she rarely showed. Zirin didn't look at him when she spoke again. There's someone I need to contact. Stu raised an eyebrow. Here? You trust this place enough to transmit. It's not a full comm burst, just a directed ping to a coded frequency. She hesitated. Someone who owes me. Someone who might still care. He didn't press for details. He just nodded. I'll scan the lower levels, he said. Make sure there are no surprises. She gave him a glance, part amused, part grateful. Don't get lost. This place is older than it looks. He disappeared down the nearest corridor, leaving Zirin alone with the console. Her fingers hovered above the interface for a long moment before she keyed in a sequence. There was a pause, then a soft beep of confirmation. The signal had been sent. A direct, encrypted pulse across an old smuggler's network, coded for one person only. Valen Tyrar, once a pilot, once a thief, once more. He had vanished after the war, gone dark after stealing a ship full of sensitive Orexin data. The last time she'd seen him, he'd told her, "If you ever fall, send the bird home." She had thought she'd never use the code. Now, she had no choice. "Come through for me," she whispered. Her voice echoed in the quiet room. Meanwhile, Stu moved through the lower tunnels, flashlight cutting through darkness. Storage rooms, rusted crates, old mining tools sealed in vacuum lockers. Nothing useful until he found the hangar. And there it was, a transport vessel, obsolete, patched, but intact. His breath caught. "Zirin," he said into his comm, "you might want to come see this." She arrived minutes later, her expression unreadable as she stepped into the hangar. Her eyes locked onto the ship. The ID markings were faded but unmistakable. "That's a core breaker, 72. Outlaw class. Last models were outlawed before the armistice. It'll fly, if we can find the right ignition codes." She turned to him. "This ship, it didn't belong to the miners. It was hidden here." "What?" She looked at the smuggler tags, etched into the nose. "Because someone was planning to disappear. Just like us." Stu smiled faintly. "Then I say we take the hint." For the next few hours, they worked together in silence, cleaning, scanning, powering up long silent systems. The engines were intact. The navigation core had errors, but could still take basic input. The comms were fried, but that was almost a blessing. They didn't want to be found. At last, Zirin dropped into the pilot's chair and ran a final systems check. Everything flickered green. She turned to him. "One ping. One chance. If Valen gets this and comes through, he can give us fake IDs, new transponder tags, and clearance to land in a free zone. And if he doesn't," she paused, "then we leave anyway." Stu leaned against the bulkhead. Together, Zirin met his eyes. Always. The ship powered on with a soft rumble. Above, a small sensor lit up red, an inbound signal. She snapped to the console. Encrypted. Old signature. But hers. "Incoming vessel. Stand by for docking alignment." Stu peered at her. "That your guy?" Zirin smiled. For the first time in days, it wasn't just a survival smile. It was real. "Yes, that's him." Together, they stepped into the cockpit. A new beginning was on its way. The transport vessel hummed gently beneath them, its engines warming like the breath of something long asleep, now waking for purpose. Zirin stood at the controls, her fingers poised above the navigation interface, reading the final confirmation codes from the incoming ship. Outside the viewport, Valen's vessel, sleek, dark, almost spectral, aligned itself with their docking bay. He hadn't changed the ship's transponder signature. Same rebellious disregard for protocol. Same quiet message. "I came because you asked." Stu stood beside her, arms folded, watching her with a quiet intensity. He hadn't said much since they'd confirmed the signal. Maybe he didn't need to. There was a heaviness in the moment. Not dread, but gravity. Like everything between them had led to this pivot point. The docking clamps hissed as the outer hatch connected. Pressure equalized with a click. Zirin and Stu exchanged a look, equal parts readiness and hesitation, and walked to the entrance. The door slid open. Valen Tyrar stepped through like a shadow made flesh, wrapped in a scuffed pilot's jacket and an air of practiced detachment. His silver eyes scanned the room, landing first on Zirin, then briefly on Stu. "Didn't expect you to actually call in that favor," he said, voice rough with time and distance. Zirin gave a faint smile. "Didn't think you'd answer." He shrugged. "Still owed you one." His gaze shifted again to Stu, curiosity flickering beneath his nonchalance. "This him?" Stu lifted a brow. "Depends on who I'm being today." Valen chuckled once, brief but genuine. "I like him." Zirin cut in. "We need clearance papers, dual identities, new transponder keys, and somewhere safe to land, off Virexen grids. Valen's expression didn't change. Already loaded on your ships and AV core. You're now cargo inspectors bound for Calera Station. Civilian colony, neutral sector. Not a bad place to disappear. Thank you, she said, quieter now. He nodded, then turned to leave. Take care of her, he said over his shoulder to Stu. No threat in his voice, just a tired kind of wisdom. I plan to, Stu replied. The door slid shut. The silence that followed was full of possibilities. Zirin returned to the controls. She didn't speak as she activated the launch sequence. The ship responded like it had been waiting years to fly again. Lights blinked green across the console. The engine hum rose to a purr. Stu came up beside her, close but not touching. So that's it. She glanced at him. That's the start. They locked eyes. Neither spoke. Then she leaned in, almost unconsciously, and he met her halfway. Their lips touched, soft at first, uncertain, like a question asked in a language neither of them fully spoke. But then it deepened. Warmth bloomed between them, grounding them more than gravity ever could. There was no desperation in the kiss, no fear. Only choice. Only them. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads touched briefly, and Zirin whispered, "We're not just running anymore." "No," Stu said, voice low. "We're living." She smiled, real and unguarded. Then her fingers danced across the console, and the engines roared to life. The transport lifted, weightless at last, rising into the upper sky where the haze began to clear and stars bled through like fresh ink across a new page. Below them, the cursed world shrank, its jagged ridges and poison valleys fading into memory. Ahead lay only stars, and a future that no longer belonged to war, orders, or fear. Only to them, together. The sky above Calera 3 glowed with soft lavender light, the kind that didn't burn but embraced. Morning on this world arrived quietly, without the need for alarms or urgency. The air was warm, the breeze gentle, and the soil beneath their feet held no memory of war. Zirin stood on the porch of their modest, earth-sheltered home, the hem of her loose shirt brushing her thighs, her bare feet rooted in the cool stone beneath her. The wind toyed with her long, black hair, lifting it like silk banners in the breeze. In her hands, she cradled a ceramic cup, steam curling from it like a fragile spirit. Behind her, the door creaked open. Stu stepped out, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair wild, his shirt misbuttoned. He looked like a man who had finally begun to forget the weight of survival. And he looked at her like she was the reason. "You always beat me to sunrise," he murmured, voice still scratchy from sleep. She didn't turn at first. "I don't sleep as deeply as you." He came closer, sliding his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. "That's because I keep you two safe." Zirin laughed softly. "Is that what you tell yourself?" "It's my favorite lie." They stood like that for a long while, watching the sun rise over the pale hills. Birds that didn't exist anywhere else in the galaxy began to sing. Bright, soft notes like flutes made of wind. Somewhere in the distance, water ran across stones in a slow-moving stream. Life, quiet, resilient, undisturbed, breathed around them. Stu stepped beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've changed," he said gently. "So have you." He looked at her then, not just her face, but everything she was. The woman who once stood with a gun in his face, who didn't flinch in battle, who kept her emotions sealed behind walls reinforced by duty and pain. She was still that woman, but now she allowed herself to feel. And he was the only one she'd ever let all the way in. "I never thought I'd get this," he said quietly. "Not just peace, but this us." Zirin turned to face him fully. The way she looked at him now, calm, open, unafraid, told him more than words ever had. "I used to believe love was a luxury," she said. "Something soft, weak, a distraction from survival. And now," she stepped closer, "now I know love is survival. It's the reason you keep going when there's no logic left. It's the one thing that made me want to come back. Every time." Stu's breath caught. "Zirin, I love you," she said simply, like it had always been true. And it had. He touched her face with both hands, as if grounding himself in the reality of her. Say it again. She leaned into his palms, her voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Stu. Then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss born of desperation or danger. It didn't carry the adrenaline of escape or the bitterness of goodbye. This kiss was slower, deeper. It was the kind of kiss that rewrote memory, that made the past blur and the future settle into something real. His hands slipped around her back, hers tangled in his shirt. They weren't just two people holding each other. They were choosing each other, fully, fearlessly. When they finally pulled back, neither spoke for a moment. Then Stu smiled, forehead still resting against hers. I love you too, Zirin. I think I've been waiting my whole life to say that. She chuckled, low and warm. Took you long enough. The sun climbed higher, painting gold over their skin. The colonies stirred in the distance, but for now, the world belonged to them. Two fugitives, two survivors, and now two lovers. Not just alive, but free.